Morning, kids. Making sure that Brexiteers don't avoid the blame for the damage of Brexit was always going to be one of the challenges of this decade, but when the receipts are this good. As a great man once said, fun isn't something one considers when balancing the universe, but this does put a smile on my face. And last night it was Brexiteer journalist Ella Whelan on LBC complaining about Brexit.
It is pretty sick making the relish with which politicians enjoy looking, describing and rubbing our nose in how bad they say it's all going.
It's an interesting choice of words, rubbing your noses in it, like we're the ones holding you down and making you look at what you've done. But we're not in power. You're in power. You've been holding us down for the last 7 years while we screamed for help. Because the majority of people knew that Brexit would make us poorer and cost lives. Because in 2018, the government's leaked documents showed that even they knew that Brexit would make us poorer under any circumstances. And the British Medical Association said that a no-deal Brexit, which you supported, would be a catastrophe for the NHS and make us more vulnerable to deadly pandemics. Which is why in the 2019 election, the majority of people voted for parties offering a second referendum. Like I said, we were screaming for help, and it was Brexiteers like you who were holding us down.
You say, oh, it's so bad, they're going to food banks, oh, it's so terrible. I've just described how bad the cost of living crisis is. No one thinks that things are going well.
Funny, you seem to be acting like you care about the cost of living crisis, but isn't this you in 2018 saying that you'd be happy for Brexit to make millions of working class people poor?
I haven't been in Westminster making the calls. I tell you, if I had, there'd be a lot of things that were different. You just said you were Brexiteer.
Ah yes, the I would have done Brexit better defence. So what exactly would you have done, Ella?
I mean, it's scandalous that MPs are trying to rule out an option, the only option which remains true to what people voted for.
Hang on, instead don't get that people voted for no deal.
You were explicitly supporting leaving the EU without any trade deal, which means that even our tariff-free access that we have now would be gone, which means all the economic damage we're seeing now would be much, much worse. It's like if we'd spent 3 years saying, don't bash us in the kneecaps with a hammer, and then when we're unable to walk, you then say, hey, don't blame me, I would have shot us in the head.
The things that could have been differently is that you could have had politicians take seriously the exciting prospect of voting citizens wanting to be more involved in politics, looking at big things like sovereignty, big things like democracy.
Irony just died. Irony just died. Because here you are, complaining about Brexit, saying that it's not the Brexit that you voted for, saying that the problem is that after the vote, people were shut out of the democratic process, and yet when Brexit was being negotiated and millions of people were marching in the streets saying, hey, once this thing's been negotiated, we want to be able to vote on it to make sure that we prefer it to EU membership, you said,
if we have a confirmatory vote, a second referendum, a people's vote, however you want to dress it up, what that is saying is you're asking voters to beg for their political views.
And when I made this point in 2019 that Brexiteers can't at the same time say we know what we voted for and also say nobody knows how the negotiations are going to go, she replied basically saying, yes, we know what we voted for, the politicians just aren't doing it. And so I said, no, you know what you hoped for. What you actually voted for was just to leave the EU, which could mean any of 1,000 different relationships between the EU and the UK. And you even accepted that argument, but you still said people shouldn't be allowed to vote on it unless you got your destroy the UK option on the table. You were even willing to go against the wishes of other Brexiteers.
Didn't ask.
And I'm a Leave voter. I wouldn't be happy with no deal. And lots of people who voted Leave perhaps wanted something more like Norway. I think both sides do need to compromise, a little bit and understand
if we
that
compromise on this, I think for me and for most Brexiteers, it was a real threat to democracy because democracy is on the line.
Now, this conversation has aged perfectly.
In terms of compromising democracy, if Brexit does go through and it leaves everybody worse off, surely that also risks discontent and disillusionment.
There's no hard evidence to show that that would happen.
And how's she feeling now?
The challenge that Brexit set the British political class, unfortunately, it has been squandered. And I'm miserable about that.
But when all else fails, here's where all the Brexiteer politicians and journalists will fall back to.
But what I will not accept is that it's somehow our fault, that it's the fault of voters in Bolton or in Tottenham.
They're trying to hide behind the people that they lied to, the people who they betrayed. Because the idea that millions of working class people, still choking on austerity, would vote for Brexit expecting to make their own lives harder is ludicrous. You cannot tell me with a straight face that the millions of working class parents now facing the sharpest rise in poverty ever recorded are looking around and thinking, yeah, Brexit was worth making my kids' lives harder, because most people were not experts in EU law in 2016, and that includes Remainers. I've said many times that under different circumstances, I could have easily voted leave. But because of my EU human rights background, I'm one of maybe a few thousand Brits whose full-time job required me to understand the EU. Now that includes all politicians and all political journalists, including Ella Whelan. So politicians and journalists don't get to hide behind voters because they're not the same. It was their full-time job to know how Brexit would affect the people of the UK. You're like a lawyer who gives fraudulently bad advice to her client, and then when she's challenged on that says, what? You calling my client stupid? Have a great week.